In most good stories, it is the character's personality that creates the action of the story. If you start with real personality, a real character, then something is bound to happen. Flannery O'Connor.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses.
The question that we have for today comes from one of our Discord listeners. How do I approach different body types and body sizes with respect? This is a great question, and I think it's becoming more important and popular as discussion around plus-size representation increases in the writing spaces. But first and foremost, we want to make sure you know, whatever their body type is, it doesn't make the character interesting. It doesn't make the character who they are. It is an aspect of that character, just like their hair color or their skin tone or anything like that would be. And in certain circumstances, yes, those things will affect how that character moves through the world and how other people view them, but it should not be their only personality.
Yeah, it's their opinions, their skill set, these types of things that make them interesting characters. Please do not have the friend group be the warrior, the puzzle solver, the flirt, and the skinny one. The skinny one tells us nothing about the character. Give us something about their personality in order to separate them from the set.
There's a lot of different ways to describe bodies in writing. First and foremost, don't overdo it. I know Lee is basically going to tell you, leave it out entirely, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
But in a lot of fiction, physical description gives people a reference point, a good solid anchor, but it does not need to be everywhere.
Generally, just one or two comments so we get the idea when we're first introduced to the character. That'll be more than enough. And then you can slide it into other descriptions when they're giving body language, that kind of thing, to reinforce it. But you don't have to give 3 paragraphs about where the exact curves are on this character.
Metaphors can be a great way to help convey ideas and representations of different physicalities of a body. Animal metaphors can be a very useful thing, as can archetypes, but you do need to be careful. Describing someone with bird-like features is okay, but relating them to an elephant is not. And I would say that's only okay if you are writing it as dialogue from a character you want people to hate.
You can also lean on certain well-known characters throughout the world to help describe your character. If they have a Venus-like figure or more of a Bacchus-type figure, these are very different people, in this case gods, that are known in part because of their body type.
One of the biggest purposes behind providing physical description is to give your readers a bit of physical reference to differentiate between characters. So when you are writing these things, you want to make sure that the physical traits you're describing are those distinguishing factors, things that stand out, things that will separate them and pull them apart from the rest of the group and identify them.
The example that I saw that proved this point really well is tall. You say a character is tall, he's 6'2". Okay, if you're in a town of an average of 5'7", where everyone is somewhat on the shorter side, 6'2" seems enormous. But if everyone in the town is around 6 feet tall, he doesn't seem that tall in comparison. So using the same descriptor can completely change how the character is seen compared to everyone else around them. So your physical traits should distinguish them without defining them.
And remember, there is a lot more to someone's appearance than just their weight, just their body type. The pitch of their voice can be an indication of their size. Big laughs are often associated with bigger people.
Even something as simple as the texture of their skin, if their hands are calloused, these kinds of things can help tell us about the character without going, he weighs this much and is this tall, and we get a mugshot description of him.
And while it is good to note things like eye color and hairstyles, those aren't as good of an indication of who the character is than those other specific indications. Blue eyes don't tell us anything about the character.
So the question was, how do I describe these types of characters? Especially females, we don't want to be pejorative when talking about this particular type of body, but I also don't want to ignore that these bodies exist. So we're going to talk about women first, and then we'll talk about men.
So common words for women, if you are trying to describe their general shape, especially around the waist, you have the common terms of pear-shaped, where they have a smaller shoulders but wider hips. You have the hourglass shape, which for a very long time was the ideal curvature of a body, where you'd have a broader chest, tiny waist, and larger hips.
You could also say things like them being top heavy if the shoulders are broader than the hips, or if it's pretty much straight all the way down. My sister has a very straight body. Or even shapely. If there are lots of curves in lots of different places, then we can say that without it coming across as super negative.
A different way that you could phrase the top-heavy one is to describe them like swimmers. If you've ever seen a swimmer body, it is very broad-shouldered and narrowed hips. It's like a triangle. They're like Doritos on legs.
Weren't you a swimmer?
I was. And I also had this problem. Not so much anymore. I am shapely now. If you are looking at things like height, you have petite is a good word to describe. You know, there is a little bit of skinny connotation with petite, but technically it's more about the height of a person than their overall size. But if you were looking for somebody who is very tall, you have the Amazonian. And this is not South America Amazon. We're talking about the Amazon of mythology.
I also think it's important, especially when describing women, that they aren't described specifically by how much the needle would move if they stepped on a scale. It's more important to me to describe if someone is athletic, or if they're slight, or if they're frail or powerful, if they're soft or elven. These types of descriptions tell us a lot more about not only their physicality, but how they move through space.
And if you are trying to write someone who is larger, if they're plus size, you do need to be somewhat careful with the words. And which words you use from which characters are going to make a difference. Other words that you can use are curvy, curvaceous, voluptuous. This applies to women and men, which we're going to get to in a second, but whichever words you choose, you need to consider which character they're coming from and if we want to like that character or not. So let's get into what kinds of words you can use to describe a man.
I found in looking up some good words for dudes, a fair amount of these have to do with alcohol. The first couple that I found were things like barrel-chested and stout. These types of physicalities where you know they're taking up space, but in a joyous kind of way.
You can also have something like hulking that implies a very muscular, large build, or solid, sometimes even broad. Some of my favorites, though, are the more dad bod style descriptions where they're husky, they're soft, they're cuddleable. And I don't think that's a word, but cuddly. That's the word I was looking for.
Of course, not all of your dudes are going to be big, square, broad-chested type guys. You're going to have the other side that are spry, a little more nimble, sometimes lanky or taut. I saw a trailer for a movie that's coming out that I'm interested in seeing, and the actor was talking about how he wanted his muscles to look. The actor is like 60 years old, and the word that he used was ropey, which I thought was a great description of the body that he has in this movie.
Weirdly enough, describing necks in men tends to be fairly common. I would say necks and forearms if you're going into the romance genre. But when it comes to necks, you have a bull-necked or a buffalo's neck, these very thick-necked bodybuilder-style muscles holding up their head. Or you can have a prominent Adam's apple.
I also tend to see more often with men than with women talking about the types of muscles they have in association with a profession or a thing that they do. So a lumberjack versus a martial artist versus an archer has very different shoulders than a swordsman, a swimmer's body like we talked about earlier. All of these things tell us not only that they have muscles, but which muscle groups are emphasized based on what they're using them for.
I think it's also important to remember whether you are describing a man, a woman, someone who is non-binary, that beauty standards can be different in your world, especially in fantasy. You don't have to have the beauty standard be today's modern idea of what beauty is. You can make it up. You can have things that are way more accepted in society than they are today, and just have it be normal. Because what's normal today was not the beauty normal 500 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, or 5,000 years ago.
I was reading through the Odyssey recently, and the peak standard for women's beauty was braided hair, a long nose, and pale arms. Sure, why not? But we can tell because of the affection that this point of view character is talking about, that and she had these long, elegant, pale arms. We know that this is a positive in this world, even though it's not a positive in our readers' minds today. So, as an author, you get to redefine what beauty is because you're creating this world. Please do so in a way that we can all enjoy together. But you can only succeed in that if you
Write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.